Hi everyone, this is Germinal Van, founder of GGV Publishing Company, and I am the author of the latest book entitled Sowell, A Misunderstood Economist. So the purpose of this video is to talk to you about Sowell, who he was, and specifically about his philosophy in his writings. So this book, first and foremost, is an intellectual biography rather than a personal biography, but I still dedicate a chapter about the major events of his life. So Sowell was born in rural North Carolina in the 1930s, and he had a rough childhood, and he was not destined for greatness. Nevertheless, here is a man who has achieved unprecedented success in the world of academics, even though as a professor he was fought and reprimanded by the intelligentsia. But Sowell received his doctorate degree in economics from the University of Chicago. And what is interesting about this is that when he was there, when he was studying under Milton Friedman and George Stigler, two Nobel Prize economists, he was a Marxist. Today, Sowell is known to be one of the foremost libertarian public intellectuals in the world. But before becoming a libertarian and a zealous advocate of the market order, Sowell was a dedicated Marxist. As a matter of fact, he wrote his senior thesis in college. When he was at Harvard University, he wrote his senior thesis on Marxism, defending Marxism. But then, as he became a libertarian, he wrote another book on Marxism, now decrying, or should I say, rebutting all the assumptions of Marxian philosophy. So how Sowell became a libertarian? So Sowell, as I say, when he was studying under Milton Friedman and George Stigler, these two giants of economics could not convince him of the power of markets. He became a Marxist when he worked for the U.S. Department of Labor, when he was analyzing the minimum wage in the sugarcane trade in Puerto Rico. And he saw that the more they increased the minimum wage, the more unemployment was soaring. And when he was trying to address the issue, they shut him down. So that's when he realized that government had an agenda that is strikingly different from the agenda of ordinary people. So Sowell taught at Ivy League schools such as Cornell. He also taught at Brandeis and in other prominent universities. And then in the early 1980s, he became a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and he's been there ever since. So at the Hoover Institution as a fellow, he didn't have to teach, so he had a lot of time to write about his ideas on race, culture, philosophy, social theory, history, politics, and economics. Now that you guys know a little bit about Sowell, why is he so misunderstood? Sowell is misunderstood, because he does not adhere to a way of thinking that is presumed by a certain type of people. When you live in the United States, especially when you're a minority, especially in terms of ethnic groups, if you're Black, if you're Hispanic, usually we expecting you to lean left, meaning that we're expecting you to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a political party in the US that advocates for an expansion of government powers. They believe that it is through government that we can achieve equality, a fairer society, an equitable redistribution of resources. And Sowell argued against this, which made him a very unconventional and controversial scholar. And the reason why he's misunderstood is because the way Sowell approaches society, like economic and social and political phenomena, is that we need to understand first that we're first and foremost individuals. So Sowell used what we call methodological individualism. Methodological individualism is a philosophical concept which says that in order to address societal issues, you need to look at people's personal motivations, because everything starts with the individual. The individual is the primary unit of social consciousness. So when we look at society, society is nothing more than an aggregate of individuals. And yet the political class, the mainstream media, and the intelligentsia treat society as a unit that is completely different or separate or independent of the people, or should I say of the individuals that make up that society. So the intelligentsia, the political elite, and the mainstream media, when they argue in favor of society, we need a fairer society, we need a just society, they argue in the sense that society as a unit, separate from its individual, has its own thinking process, which is not true. It's individuals who have their own thinking process. Individuals have goals. Society does not have goals. When the intelligentsia, the political elite, and the mainstream media talk about the common good, they portray it as if society, independent of individuals, has its own aspiration to the common good. But that's not true. And that's what Thomas Sowell has been arguing. The common good, what makes up the common good is when individuals pursue the self-interest. And it's by pursuing the self-interest that they eventually, or should I say inadvertently, reach a consensus to advance society further. That's what Adam Smith talked about in The Wealth of Nations. Thomas Sowell has been essentially reprimanded by the black elite because as a black man, he was supposed to be in favor of the advancement of black people. And yet the positions that he takes goes against the dominant narrative in the black community. The black community is a community that believes in collectivism. That means that they prioritize the interests of the group over the interests of individuals. But the flaw is that a group doesn't have interests per se. Only individuals do. Let me explain why. A group is a collective of individuals. Let's say that we have a group of 5 people. Within that group of 5, there is always a dominant figure that will impose his will on everyone else. And when the others refuse to comply, they're the one that will be reprimanded for jeopardizing the interests of the group. And that's how we saw with every revolution. Let me give you the example of the French Revolution. When the French Revolution happened, Robespierre, who took the leadership of the revolution, created a dictatorship where he executed thousands of people for having a counter-revolutionary spirit, right? He would create plots to accuse those who disagree with him and saying that they're the ones who were the enemy of the state. They were the enemy of the people. The problem with group rights is that it creates a cult within the group. And that cult within the group is that the leader of the group is the one that is worshipped. So when we look at, for example, the black community, which is a very collectivist culture, we usually tend to worship, as black people, we tend to worship our leaders. And we follow their words as if they were gospels. But the problem is that within the group, since we're all individuals, we each have different interests. We each have different preferences, choices, and values. And we allocate our resources according to our choice, according to our preferences, and according to our values. That's how we make decisions. So when you subdue yourself to a group, the group assumes that each individuals within the group all have the same problem, and that's not true. They may have some common interest, but they're still individual, which means that the exactness of the problem will never be the same. It will never be uniform because we're all individuals. And that's what Thomas Sowell has been arguing about. So he was saying that for a community like the Black community to move forward, what we need is permissive laws. We need laws that will, in fact, bring forth ordinary people's accessibility to economic resources, rather than letting the government determine who should have access to those resources. Because the issue is that when the government is the one who takes over the production of resources, it creates what we call here crony capitalism. It creates winners and losers. That means that the government decides who should have access to those resources and who shouldn't have. And how do we see that? We do see that through the lots of regulations that government impose, that the barrier entries that government impose in certain industry, which keeps the small guy apart and keeps the corporations ruling and running those industries. So that's what Thomas Sowell has been criticizing. And moreover, he has been also criticizing the Black communities that we focus too much on symbols rather than results. Thomas Sowell is a very analytical, data-driven, evidence-based, and concrete person. He said, whatever we talk about, yes, it's good, but what we want is the result. What are the results of the things we advocate for? For example, Black people have always said that the reason why the Black community has struggled to advance in American society is because of the legacy of slavery. And Thomas Sowell is saying that's not the case, because after the abolition of slavery and during Jim Crow, so basically before the 1960s, the Black family was rather stronger on economic terms. The rate of marriage was much higher. The rate of employment was much higher, especially self-employment within the Black community, because at the time, there was no welfare state. And when the FDR administration created the welfare state, it was specifically for ordinary whites. Blacks did not have access to those welfare programs like that. So Blacks had no choice but to rely on themselves. They had to rely on the market. And at that time, Black people were better off economically speaking. Although politically speaking, they did not have any political rights. And in the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, a shift happened. The shift was that Black people trade their economic rights for the political rights. So, and when now they have more political rights, they can vote, they can elect people of their community into office. What happened is that a degradation of the Black culture happened. And that happened through the welfare state. That's what Thomas Sowell has explained in many of his books, is that he said that the welfare state basically created a system of dependence. And dependence is the foundation of poverty. When you depend on something, that means that you cannot function, you cannot work on your own without that thing you depend on. And when you depend on something, you're basically handicapped. So Thomas Sowell has been arguing that the welfare state has handicapped Black independence. It has handicapped Black self-reliance. Because today when we look at the Black community is the minority group that has the highest number of individuals occupying political office. And yet, when we look at the living standard of Black people in Black cities or in Black populated places, there's a huge discrepancy. Let me give you, for example, Baltimore. Baltimore has been run by Democratic mayors, and Baltimore has been run by black mayors for a very long time, and yet Baltimore is one of the worst cities in the country. The rate crime is astronomically high. If politics was the path to self-sufficiency, then why a city like Baltimore, why a city like Detroit are completely collapsing? That's what Thomas Sowell has been explaining, because politics has never been the path to self-sufficiency. It was always economic power that has been the path to self-sufficiency, and that was the philosophy that Booker T. Washington was advocating for. And unfortunately, his philosophy did not prevail, but the philosophy of W.E.B. Du Bois is the one that prevailed. Beyond that, Thomas Sowell also talked about discrimination, disparities, and the redistribution of wealth, where he argued that wealth should not be redistributed because it is only created, and people are paid according to what they produce. Therefore, what we need is to, again, implement laws that will expand people's access to resources. That's how we create wealth, and that's how we expand wealth. And people never ask the right question. They never ask how to create more wealth. Instead, they ask how to redistribute wealth. But the problem with the redistribution of wealth is that it creates a static system. Because when you redistribute wealth, there's no more creation. Because those who have the ability to create wealth are no longer incentivized, because whatever they create is taken away from them and redistributed to the least productive members of societies. So that's what Thomas Sowell has been explaining in this book. I've been explaining this book, and that's what Thomas Sowell has been explaining throughout his intellectual career. So this is why Thomas Sowell is misunderstood, because he starts from the individual. He says that we need to understand people for who they are. And what people are is that they simply pursue their self-interest. That's why he argued for the constrained vision. And the political class, the mainstream media, and the intelligentsia take the unconstrained vision, where they assume that they know better what is best for ordinary people than ordinary people know themselves. And that's quite a pretty arrogant way to see things. People not everyone has the same level of sophistication. And it's because we all do not have the same level of sophistication that we need to let people decide for themselves what is best for themselves. And at the end of the day, no matter what we do, no matter how we act, we always do it for the pursuit of our self-interest. Even, again, a selfless action is always rooted in a self-interest. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's simply that, let's say that when you spare someone, when you see a homeless person on the street and you spare him a $20 bill, what you did is that, sure, the act in itself is selfless, but what you just did is that you prioritize the self-interest of the homeless over yours. But it doesn't mean that you don't have any self-interest. Your self-interest is that by giving the $20 bill to the homeless person, you feel better about yourself, you pat yourself on the shoulder, and you call yourself a good person. But that's your self-interest here, is to appear as a good person. The self-interest of the homeless is to get the $20 so that he can feed himself. So yes, it's a win-win situation, but let us not omit the fact that it was the pursuit of self-interest here that led to an optimal outcome. And that's what Thomas Sowell is talking about here, is that human beings at the end of the day are flawed beings, who pursue their self-interest. So it's important to take them as they are rather than trying to change them and make them into things that they are not. And the unconstrained vision advocated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a Swiss-born philosopher, saying that no, human beings are corrupt by external factors. Otherwise, if it's not those external factors corrupting them, they're inherently good people. So that pretty much promotes what we call the concept of benevolent dictatorship. So there is no benevolent dictatorship. Again, for a society to prosper on its own, we need to treat people as they are. individuals who are pursuing the self-interest, who are trying to maximize the utility of their resources. And it's by letting people pursuing the self-interest in the maximization of the utility of the resources that they create value that improve the living standard of everyone around them. And again, as I said at the beginning, that's what Adam Smith has always been talking about, the invisible hand in the wealth of nations. And lastly, this is my personal opinion on this, my personal touch is that Thomas Sowell is a man who humbly deserves the Nobel Prize, but unfortunately did not win it. And he did not win it according to the Nobel, although they never say it, but those who follow the Nobel Prize and who understand how they determine who is worthy of a prize or not, is that they put a high emphasis on quantitative, sophisticated techniques, right? So most of the economists who win the Nobel Prize are people with strong mathematical skills. Let me first say that Thomas Sowell has strong mathematical skills, because you cannot graduate with a PhD without performing econometrics. Thomas Sowell had to do that. Although his thesis was on the history of economic thought, even in order for him to advance to candidacy, to complete his courses and then advance to candidacy, he had to take courses like price theory and econometrics and all these mathematical classes, which requires you to have good commands of mathematics. Otherwise, you cannot advance to candidacy. So the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Committee, they focus a lot on economists who use extensive econometric models, mathematical models in their paper. But Alfred Nobel said that the purpose of the Nobel Prize is to award it to a person whose work has had a consequential social impact on mankind. When we look at the work of Thomas Sowell, it has had a consequential social impact on mankind, because those who have read his work, and you guys can check online all the reviews. Of course, there's some negative reviews. There's some people disagree with Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is not God. Obviously, he's a human being, and it's fair to disagree with him. But most of the reviews that you will encounter online are people who say that before reading him, they had a completely different view of the world. And after reading him, their entire mindset and vision of the world completely shifted for the better. That's the part that I need to add here, for the better. That being said, Thomas Sowell has opened the minds of a lot of people. The mainstream media knew that if they brought him on their platforms, it will drive people's attention away from the dominant narrative. That is why Thomas Sowell has been set aside from the mainstream media. By my opinion, if we respect the wish of Alfred Nobel, who is to award a scholar who has done work that has impacted the world and advanced and contributed to the advancement of mankind. Therefore, Thomas Sowell deserves to be among those people who win the Nobel Prize. But unfortunately, the Nobel Committee never awarded him to him, because apparently he doesn't use mathematics in his writings. He has not published in professional academic journals. But for Thomas Sowell, it was never about being a prized scholar. What Thomas Sowell was always concerned about is spreading the truth, to intellectually awaken people. He wanted people to be knowledgeable about the world and not about winning prizes. Of course, Thomas Sowell won a lot of intellectual prizes, do not get me wrong. But the Nobel Prize, which is the most coveted prize in the world, I believe he deserved to be among those people to be awarded the prize. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was my assessment of Thomas Sowell, my presentation of the book, Thomas Sowell, A Misunderstood Economist. So hit the link below to purchase your copy on the GGV publishing website or directly on Amazon.com. And I will see you guys next time.